Ready for a deep dive?
Always.
Okay, good. Today we're going to be exploring light
Ooh.
and how scientists can actually measure some of its properties
Okay.
using something called diffraction.
Sounds complicated.
It's really not.
All right.
It's actually super simple.
Okay.
And they can even use tools as basic as a ruler.
Really?
Yeah. So imagine trying to measure something like
Yeah.
the wavelength of light.
Tiny.
Super tiny.
Yeah.
Using just a ruler.
Okay.
That's what we're going to be looking at today.
Interesting.
So our source material is this really cool blog post.
Okay.
And it's all about this physics workshop that was held at the Singapore Science Center.
Cool.
So they were exploring a bunch of different things about light.
Like what?
They were looking at how light behaves,
Okay.
its wave-like properties, and then this diffraction thing, which we'll get into in a minute,
Okay.
and how they can actually use this diffraction to measure things
Uh-huh.
that are way too small to see with just our eyes.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing, what you can uncover
Yeah,
with simple tools like that
exactly.
and just a bit of know-how.
Yeah, so to really get into how this works,
Okay.
I think we need to start with just like a basic understanding of how we even understand light.
Okay.
So like,
So like a history of light.
yeah, let's go back in time.
Back in time.
What are some of the early ideas people had about light?
Well, centuries ago,
Oh.
Sir Isaac Newton
I've heard of them.
proposed the particle theory of light.
Okay.
So he believed that light was actually made up of these tiny little particles, which
Well.
kind of explains,
Oh.
why light travels in straight lines.
Right.
But
It's not that simple,
it's not that simple.
is it?
No.
So that was like the main theory for a while.
Yeah, it held sway for a while, but then in the early 19th century, this guy named Thomas Young came along,
Okay.
and he actually challenged that idea
Oh.
with his wave theory.
So light isn't just
It's not just particles.
a stream of particles.
Exactly. It's something else.
Young did this famous experiment called the double slit experiment.
What'd he do?
He basically showed that light
Yeah?
bends and spreads out
Okay.
just like waves do.
Interesting.
It was a huge discovery. I mean,
Yeah.
it totally changed how we thought about light
Yeah.
and like all its properties.
I'm guessing this is where diffraction comes in?
You got it.
Okay.
So diffraction is basically when waves bend
Okay.
as they encounter an obstacle or like pass through an opening.
Hmm.
So imagine
Okay.
light waves hitting the edge of a ruler.
Okay. I'm picturing it.
Instead of them just stopping,
Yeah.
they bend and spread out,
Okay.
and they create these really unique patterns.
So it's kind of like,
Yeah,
if you think about water waves hitting a pier
exactly.
and they bend around it.
That's a great analogy.
Cool.
And so the cool thing is
Yeah.
the spacing of those patterns,
Yeah.
those diffraction patterns,
Uh-huh.
that's directly related to the wavelength of the light.
Hold on, so we can actually use those patterns
Yeah.
to measure the wavelength of light.
Yeah.
That's super tiny.
Yeah.
Just by looking at these patterns.
Exactly.
Wow.
And that's what those participants in the Science Center workshop did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they used like a simple laser pointer
Okay.
and a ruler
Okay.
to create a diffraction pattern. And then they used some math.
Uh-huh.
And they were actually able to accurately measure the wavelength of red light.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So they measured something less than a micrometer
Yeah.
using a ruler.
Pretty cool, huh?
That's insane.
It's a testament to how powerful diffraction is
Yeah?
as a measurement tool.
Yeah.
It lets us see this world of the incredibly small
Yeah.
measure things that like we can't even see.
That's mind-blowing.
I know.
And so it's making me think
Yeah.
we can measure light, but what
But
about...
other things? Yeah, like other objects, could we use diffraction to analyze like the objects themselves?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads to some really remarkable applications.
Okay.
One that comes to mind is X-ray crystallography.
You mentioned that earlier.
That?
X-ray crystallography.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard of that, but
Yeah.
remind me, how does diffraction help us see things
Well,
at such a small scale?
so it turns out that diffraction pattern,
Okay.
it's not just dependent on the wavelength of light.
Okay.
It's also influenced by the structure of the object
Okay.
that's causing the diffraction.
Okay.
So different objects create different diffraction patterns.
Interesting.
It's kind of like fingerprints.
Oh, so we can look at those patterns
Yeah.
and kind of figure out
Uh-huh.
the arrangement of the atoms?
Exactly.
Wow.
It's not quite that simple.
Okay.
Like, you don't just look at the pattern and know the structure.
Okay.
But that's the basic principle behind X-ray crystallography.
Oh, okay.
So scientists use X-rays.
Which have a much shorter wavelength than visible light
Right.
to create those diffraction patterns
Okay.
from crystals.
Why crystals?
Crystals have a very ordered,
Right.
repeating structure.
Got it.
So their atoms are arranged in this regular lattice,
Okay.
which makes their diffraction patterns much clearer, easier to analyze.
So they shine X-rays at the crystal.
Yeah.
And then look at the pattern.
Uh-huh.
And that helps them figure out
Yeah.
where all the atoms are.
You got it.
Wow.
It's a revolutionary technique.
Yeah.
I mean, it's led to so many breakthroughs.
Like what?
Like understanding the structure of DNA.
Okay.
Designing new drugs,
Right.
new materials.
Wow. It's amazing how something as simple as the bending of light can tell us so much about the structure of matter.
Absolutely.
And what's even more fascinating is diffraction has way more applications than just measuring the properties of light.
Yeah. Or looking at like the atomic structure of crystals.
Yeah. Tell me more.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. What other secrets does diffraction hold?
Well, for instance, diffraction plays a key role in spectral analysis, which is how we can identify the components of light from different sources.
Right.
So it's used in astronomy to study like the composition of stars.
Wow.
And in chemistry to identify unknown substances.
Okay.
So like forensic science.
That's amazing. So we're like breaking the light down into its building blocks.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Cool.
I mean, this technique has so many uses. Like, think about it.
Okay.
Scientists analyze starlight to understand what stars are made of, or how forensic scientists can figure out what some unknown substance is.
At a crime scene?
Right at a crime scene.
That's wild.
And it all comes down to analyzing these diffraction patterns of light.
It's like this secret language. That light's speaking.
A hidden language.
And we can understand it now.
Exactly.
And that helps us unlock all these secrets.
Yeah, and speaking of hidden languages, diffraction is also super important in optical data storage.
What's that?
Remember CDs and DVDs?
Oh, yeah, those shiny discs.
Yeah.
We used to use those.
Before streaming took over.
Yeah, before streaming.
Well, guess what? Those discs use diffraction too.
Really?
Yeah, so those tiny pits on the surface of a CD, they act like a diffraction grating.
Okay.
And the way light interacts with them.
Yeah.
That's how we read the data that's stored on the disc.
That's so cool.
I know, right?
It's crazy to think that, like, those little pits can hold so much information.
All thanks to diffraction.
All thanks to diffraction.
Yeah, it just goes to show how powerful it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, these examples we've talked about, X-ray, crystallography, spectral analysis, optical data storage. I mean, these are just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, there are so many other areas where diffraction is used.
Wow.
And new applications are popping up all the time.
So back to the Science Center workshop.
Yeah.
So they used that laser pointer and the ruler to demonstrate diffraction.
Right.
Did they use that technique to analyze, like, the structure of anything?
From what I read in the blog post,
Okay.
it seems like the workshop was mainly about showing diffraction and how to use it to measure the wavelength of light.
Got it.
They didn't really go into detail about analyzing more complex structures.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, that would require some more sophisticated equipment and techniques.
Yeah, I imagine it's a little more complicated than a laser pointer and a ruler to analyze something like the structure of a protein.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So the principles of diffraction are the same.
Okay.
But to analyze something like a protein, you need some serious firepower.
Like what?
You need powerful X-ray sources, specialized detectors, and sophisticated computer algorithms just to interpret the diffraction patterns they produce.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a whole other level of complexity
Absolutely.
that we haven't even touched on.
Yeah, and that complexity is part of what makes it so fascinating.
Cool.
But before we get too deep into the weeds, there's another application of diffraction that's a bit closer to that simple laser pointer and ruler demo. Have you ever heard of holography?
Holography?
Yeah.
It's like those 3D images you see on credit cards and banknotes.
You got it.
Those are so cool.
So holography, it's actually based on recording and reconstructing the diffraction patterns of light waves. It's how we can create those 3D images that seem to like float in space.
It's like magic.
I know, it's really cool.
How does it even work?
Well, it's a bit complicated.
Okay.
But basically, you use lasers to record the interference patterns
Okay.
of light waves reflected from an object.
Okay.
And that recorded pattern, we call that a hologram.
A hologram. Okay.
And then you can illuminate that hologram with another laser.
Okay.
To reconstruct a 3D image.
Of the original object.
Of the original object.
So you're like capturing the essence of the object through its light waves.
That's a great way to put it.
And then you can use that information to basically recreate it in 3D.
Exactly.
Wow.
And holography isn't just for those novelty images you see on credit cards. I mean, it's used in all sorts of fields.
Like what?
Data storage, microscopy, medical imaging, even art.
It's incredible how versatile diffraction is.
It's this hidden key
that
unlocks so many possibilities.
From like the super small to just the visually stunning.
Absolutely.
And we're still finding new ways to use it.
We are.
Scientists are constantly like pushing the boundary.
Exploring new applications.
In all these different fields.
Like materials science, nanotechnology, even quantum computing.
This is a lot.
It is.
I'm starting to see diffraction everywhere now.
You know, it's funny. It's one of those things that just kind of underpins so much of how we understand the universe. And we've only just scratched the surface
I bet.
Of what it can do.
Who knows what we'll discover.
I know, right?
In the future.
The future is wide open.
Yeah, it really shows you how like everything's connected in science.
It really does.
And how these basic principles can lead to these huge breakthroughs.
Absolutely.
And speaking of breakthroughs,
yeah.
What about the future of diffraction?
Ooh, good question.
Where do you think this field is headed?
Well, earlier I mentioned using diffraction to design new materials with specific optical properties.
Right.
And I think that's one area that's super exciting.
Okay.
It's this whole idea of developing materials that can manipulate light at a really tiny scale, at the nanoscale.
So we're not just watching diffraction happen anymore.
Right.
We can actually control it.
Exactly. We're going beyond just using diffraction to understand light.
Okay.
And we're starting to use it to shape light.
Okay.
Mold light.
Like really control it.
Yeah, and create totally new optical effects.
Like what kind of effects?
Well, imagine things like ultra-efficient solar cells that capture sunlight and convert it to energy way better than anything we have now.
Okay.
And it's all thanks to these carefully designed nanostructures that just optimize light absorption.
So these nanostructures are using diffraction to basically capture more light.
Pretty much.
That's amazing.
Or imagine invisibility cloaks.
Wait, invisibility cloaks?
That bend light around an object.
Like Harry Potter?
Yeah, kind of like Harry Potter.
Is that really possible?
It sounds crazy. But researchers are actually making some serious progress.
Really?
Yeah. They've created these things called metamaterials.
What are those?
They're these artificial structures with optical properties that we just don't see in nature. And these metamaterials, they can manipulate light in ways that we never thought possible, including bending it around objects.
So we're talking about making materials that can do things.
Exactly.
That no natural substance can.
We're not limited by what's found in nature anymore.
That's crazy.
We're designing and creating materials with completely new properties.
And it's all thanks to...
thanks to diffraction.
It's mind-blowing to think that we started with this simple observation that light bends when it hits something. And now we're using that knowledge
to create the impossible.
To create things.
Yeah.
That seemed impossible.
Yeah. It's incredible what humans can do.
It really is.
When we put our minds to it.
It's a testament to our ingenuity.
Absolutely.
And our desire to understand.
To manipulate.
And control.
Around us.
And diffraction has become this powerful tool.
Yeah. It's such a simple phenomenon.
Yeah.
But it's opened up so many doors.
I think we've covered a lot today.
Yeah, we have.
From the history of light to the future of materials.
And everything in between.
Any final thoughts for our listeners?
If there's one thing I want you to remember, it's that the world is full of hidden wonders. Just waiting to be discovered.
I like that.
Even the simplest things like the bending of light.
Yeah.
They can reveal these amazing secrets.
If we just know how to look.
If we just know how to look.
That's great advice.
So keep exploring. Keep asking questions. And never stop being curious.
About the world.
About the world around you.
Maybe one of our listeners will make the next big discovery.
Who knows?
In diffraction.
Maybe they'll figure out how to make those invisibility cloaks.
Maybe.
The future's full of possibilities.
It really is.
And diffraction is going to be a big part of it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive
It's been fun.
into the fascinating world of diffraction.
Absolutely.
Until next time.